Hello, we're going to start our week 2 lecture for conflict management. And this week, we're looking at perceptions of conflict, metaphors of conflict, and culture. With culture, I want to look at individualism, collectivism, low context, high context, and some elements of gender and communication and how that influences us. This week, if anything, I would say it's a week about language, though I feel like every week I might be able to say it's a week about language and perception. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which some of you may have studied in a previous class or discipline, is this idea of linguistic determinism or linguistic relativism, meaning how our language shapes how we're experiencing the world around us and how our language is shaping our thought process, our internal dialogue. And people who have multilingual might already have a deeper understanding of how one language has different vocabulary and ways of expressing something different than another language. Maybe an emotion they feel better is in a different linguistic expression than the other expression. And we'll talk about emotions when we come up to that week. Though all of these things are interwoven together, we kind of just piece them out into weeks so we can kind of focus in on it. But just always remember that they're all happening at the same time, which is why there's so much overlap. So in the vocabulary sheet that I posted for week 2, one of the first things I put is about perception is this idea of first order realities versus second order realities. And first order realities are those elements of, if I were to describe something, they're basically as the linguistic style that's trying to be objective and factual and just describe the actual action. This happened, then this happened, and then this happened, right? And trying to kind of weed out the subjective or emotional language of it. And that is really valuable. First order reality is a really valuable tool to be able to describe an event completely as this kind of skeleton framework of, even though we can't be completely objective, there's an attempt at it with first order reality. In fact, it's so difficult. We often hire people who are good at that for us, because when we describe the event that happened, we have the injury and the subjectiveness and the biases, whether they're invisible or explicit, that are leaking into our language. So we often ask a third party to jump in and translate our second order reality, which involves all the way we're attaching meaning and interpretation and our biases and all the emotions into the way we're describing whatever it is, the communication event we're talking about. So that third party can often, one of the talents that they bring is they're translators. They're translating the emotive piece into a piece that now we can enter into a dialogue. One way to think about it is just imagine if you were a conflict you've had in the past, or maybe a current one that's occupying your mental space. If you wrote down, let's say you're going to write down what happened, and you poured in all the emotion and injury and subjectivity into that description, you'd probably want to not share that with the other person, because then you would just have a conflict about that's what you think what happened, right? And then you just have a conflict about the narrative. But if I could get somehow to take that second order reality and translate it into first order reality language with the help of my third party negotiator or mediator or lawyer, whoever it is who stepped in, and they strip out all that emotive, subjective, and biased language, we would hope that what we would end up with is something that we could hand to the other party or parties in the conflict, and they would be able to read that, and maybe they would have some disagreements, maybe they would want to change some language in it, but overall it wouldn't start like a whole new fight basically, or a whole new situation to resolve. And that's the power of knowing how to use language in a conflict, and we need that tool. So I might be asking you to think about that. How would you describe something in first order reality language versus second order reality language? I don't want to put them in a hierarchy. They're both important. They both have value. Being able to know how someone injured or hurt or you, and being able to articulate that is very, very important and valuable, even if that's something we might not start out of the gate with if we wanted to be in a place where we are trying to move to resolving a situation or managing a situation. So how we would use those, let's talk about perception checking. Perception checking is a conversation steps that we would use to enter into a dialogue with someone else that we have a conflict with, or they have a conflict with us, right? We could be the one that someone has a conflict with, and we might use perception checking when the conflict is a little bitty baby conflict. We don't maybe want to use this if we're talking about something that has a historically long laundry list of things that we might be dredging up. We don't want to open the dam too much and have all that silt and sill and debris from the bottom of the dam wash through the river right away, speaking of metaphors or analogies. We really want to use perception checking as a conversation tool when things are small and manageable. It doesn't mean that you can't use it in other ways, but when you're first starting out with it and you're still developing your own skill set, this is probably a pretty, it's a good first step. So in perception checking, first, you would use that first order reality language to describe the situation. And you want to do this with as much brevity and conciseness of language as possible. You just want to say, I noticed this behavior. I noticed first order. I noticed that you haven't returned my phone calls. I noticed that you didn't say hello to me this morning and left the house without saying goodbye. Whatever it is, you're just going to say, I noticed this situation. Perception checking says that's the first step. Second step is to offer two alternative reasons for why this might be happening. And when you are trying to think of, before you start the dialogue, of what are going to be these two things, you want one of them to be, are you upset with me because I did XYZ, right? Or ABC. You'd like to say, are you upset with me, as one of them. The second one, you want to give them an out. You want to give them a chance to save face or not move into a defensiveness or create an escalatory spiral. So the second option of why they might be that way should have a lot of empathy and grace and compassion and kindness, not moving into sarcasm or belittling or even teasing behavior. We want to use the kind of communication that is kind of can be emotionally regulated and that you're in a place where you can really just state something kindly. So you left without saying goodbye and you were avoiding me in the morning. I didn't know if you were running, I didn't know if you were running late for work, or are you upset that I didn't get the dishes done last night? The end, right? That's it. So perception checking has the third step, but I do want you to notice when I'm trying these things out, I'm trying to keep what I'm saying down to just the shortest statement possible. I'm not trying to create a bunch of context. I'm not trying to move into defensiveness. And I definitely don't want to move into any of the four horsemen of the apocalypse of doing contempt or criticism or any commentary with it. I just want to state things briefly. And then the third step is the magic number, because 3 is a magic number. And that is where we're going to pass the microphone to the other person, and we're going to give them a chance to be in an explanatory place of naming their own behavior or experience. And this is the magic in this is I just want you to think about situations you've been in where someone has told you what you're feeling. They've told you what you're thinking, and they've defined you without you having any ability to enter into any of the dialogue to define yourself or explain yourself. And so this is where we are creating these conversation steps to expand a conversation. We want to move it open like an accordion, so that we can be inclusive and open to other perspectives and worldviews and move into that shared narrative piece, right? We want to create a shared narrative. So I noticed you avoided me in the morning, you left without saying goodbye. I didn't know if you were running late for work or if you were upset with me because I didn't wash the dishes, or is it something else? Is there something else going on? And that's it. Very simple. It feels really awkward the first time you do it. And some of that awkwardness, God, I'd love to talk to you about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why this conversation tool can feel a little weird at first, but we live in, well, our conversation style currently is to move into this very persuasive way where we're trying to use our chance with the microphone to persuade others, to see it my way, I've got the microphone and I'm going to move into monologue, not dialogue. I've got it and I'm not letting go. You can't have it, right? And for whatever reasons, are putting a lot of pressure on us for this persuasive style of speaking. And then there's other things about we want to be heard as much as the other person needs to be heard. And if you are in a relationship situation where there's a deficit in being heard and listening, passing the mic over to someone else does not guarantee you'll get the mic back, right? And that can create a feeling of, wow, I've already put a lot of effort into this relationship of being the listener. And here I am telling you to pass the microphone off, and that often can feel like yet another injury of no one's listening to me. No one's doing perception checking with me. So these are just 2 ideas of why sometimes this feels really awkward. I bet you could come up with some more. I'd love to hear them. Okay. Oh, no, I can't hear them yet. All right. We'll get some ideas in our team meetings about those, or maybe you'll include those in your weekly worksheets so I can hear your perspective. Okay. So I say all that to really think about going into this idea of perceptions and that dialogue. Let me pause the video for a second. I'll be right back. Okay. So I want once you hand the mic over to someone in perception checking tools, you're going to get a lot of different responses. And you might be able to predict, if you know someone really well, how they might respond as well. We might move into a defensiveness. And from what we learned from the Gottmans last week, that defensiveness often is coupled with defense attack. Yeah, like you're upset with me because I left without saying goodbye, yet you do, right? And then it goes right into the attack. So I wouldn't take the bait of moving into defensiveness if that's what you're up against. I just okay, I just wanted to check, and then move just move a step away so you can get regulated. And next week, week 3, we're going to talk about taking a break in a conversation. So when we take breaks, we really want to figure out how to step away from things in a way that doesn't create an escalatory spiral, but actually de-escalates so we can move back into dialogue. Someone might be avoidant. They go, oh, yeah, I was running late, even though you know that they are mad at you, that you didn't do the dishes. But if they say that isn't it, it was really this, say, okay. I hope did you make it on time, right? So what you're doing is you're practicing a couple of skills here. You're listening to how they're reacting and what they're saying, and you're allowing them to decide if we're going to move into a dialogue about the dishes or whatever the issue is, or are we going to move into an avoidant place? The power of perception checking is not necessarily always that you created a resolution or you moved towards something, right? We're managing conflicts. So there's some tension, there is some conflict, and you brought it up. And that is the goal with perception checking. That is the goal. The goal is you're going to bring it up. You're going to say, you were doing this nonverbal behavior and I noticed it. And so I'm telling you, I noticed it. And then you're giving the option of, it could be me. I could be the reason why this is happening. And they're either going to want a dialogue about that, and hopefully you're in relationshiping with someone who wants to move forward through a dialogue, also with the same empathy and kindness and compassion that you were bringing to that opening statement of trying to problem solve. One thing I notice is when I'm like I told you in the last video, I'm a runner, right? I'm going to be the first one to run. I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I'm not really mad. Sorry that happened, and avoid it. But when it's brought up, it does this strange thing where it kind of deflates the tension of the conflict, because the person who's doing the behavior, if they were doing it in a way to send a message through a nonverbal channel, you're saying you received that message. And so that person isn't going to now come home and have to be even more nonverbally blatant about how they're upset about something, right? Or start doing little passive aggressive or indirect aggressive tactics. Those are vocabulary words that are going to be coming up for us later in the term, but basically we're not going to be moving towards gossip, or we're not going to be trying to find subversive ways to sabotage the relationship. Okay, so all of these responses that we have to a situation, we have patterns that we've learned. They're patterns that we've learned from our childhood experiences, or watching others in conflict, or being the confidant of someone telling us about their conflicts, and we run through their narratives. And whether we say it out loud or not, we might be going, well, I wouldn't handle it that way. We're thinking something. And every time we do that, we create these kind of comparison levels. So then when we're in a conflict, we're going to decide the risks of either escalating or de-escalating. And we're going to kind of follow those patterns that we've established through our own life experiences. And we haven't talked about it yet. We're not going to talk about it yet, but we definitely want to think about the way movies and television and our entertainment industry and gaming are really, and social media, are all kind of built on creating really polarized emotions. Like, we're going to be clearly understand when someone's angry. We're going to have a clear definition of what it looks like when someone is happy or sad or depressed, right? We get these almost kind of amplified cartoon emotions displayed to us. And then in real life, boy, it doesn't always look that amplified, even though it could still have emotional impacts on us and our identity. So we definitely want to start thinking about how the media, entertainment industry, social media interactions are kind of polarizing our place into what should be those patterns when we hit our own conflicts. Part of what we're bringing into the situation are attachment styles, which there's a lot of good videos about attachment styles. I'll put one up as well. And it's also, attachment styles have kind of started entering into our vernacular about how we experience relationships and what our expectation is from the other person in the relationship to make us feel like we're in a predictable situation. So some people are more secure in their attachment style, and then we have like avoidant attachment or anxiety attachment, and those things are in our readings, but I'll put a video as well. The other thing we want to talk about as we're thinking about our experiences, we have our worldview. So our worldview is how we perceive things, what we decide to select, punctuate, and what are the things that we are deselecting. And this is where we see with perception, we have a lot of biases. Some of them are implicit. Implicit biases are invisible. They're things we're not always aware of, but they're the way that we move through our world that put emphasis and preference on certain things, and we de-emphasize or often will attack or try to attack the credibility or de-emphasize or maybe just outright ignore other such information or stimulus coming in. So just like when we think about that big sound studio board and all the volumes, our worldview, we might have a set thing that we like when we are headed out in the world. That is our foundation of how we're going to perceive the world. And then we get these interactions or these experiences that might adjust, and how open we are when we talk about being open, or how empathetic or how willing we are to include other perceptions other than our own, will be how willing are we to move those different sound studio board volumes up and down, and are we willing to change our mind? Are we willing to accept influence from others? And how do we use critical thinking skills to dialogue and find ways to interact with others that isn't just, no, this is my way. This is the way I see things, and that's it. I got it. Don't mess with it. I don't like change. I need things to be predictable. And there are really important things about why some people might be really strict about their worldview. Some of it is because they've experienced trauma in the past, And the way that they were able to get through that trauma and move to be more functional in the society was they need things to be very predictable. So they might have some strictness with that. Sometimes it's because of health reasons, that someone might have found a way to stabilize their health, and they want to be really strict with that as well. So there's lots of things, and that's not the only thing. I bet we could, again, if we could dialogue, I bet you could come in with a lot of reasons why some people have a tendency to move into more open experiences of accepting influence from others, and why others are more lean towards that predictability versus novelty, dialectical tensions on that spectrum. So with our worldview and our perception, as we select things, a stimuli comes in and we're going to select it, we are going to describe it through our language to attach meaning to it. So I'm going to talk about metaphors now. Metaphor in its most simple form is x equals y. X equals y, and whatever we put in for x, let's say x is what is known. What is known? We know this, whatever x is, but I don't know what y is. So I'm going to use a metaphor where I'm going to attach what I don't know, y, to what I do know, x, and that x equals y helps me know y better, right? It helps me know, okay, now I can relate to y, or I have a beginning place to understand that. One of the most famous metaphors of all time is from Romeo and Juliet. Juliet is the sun. I like that one because we have that word is, which for us math people is usually the equal sign. So Juliet is the sun. So I don't know, Romeo doesn't know Juliet. He's just saw her at a party, got a dance. He snuck around, saw her out on her balcony in the middle of the night. We'll skip by that sketchy stalker behavior right now for the sake of understanding metaphors, but we could get into that if we needed to. So x equals y. So he sees Juliet in the middle of the night exiting on her balcony. He says, Juliet is the sun, and it's the middle of the night. So I don't know Juliet, but I do know the sun, and the sun is bright. So he sees her, and there's a light emitting from her room there. The sun is hot. She's hot. Sun gives life. You can't have life without sun. It helps us grow. It helps us live. And those of us who live in places where it gets really dark in the winter, we know how important that sunshine is when it does peek out of the clouds every now and then, or if spring starts coming and we get more of it, we're like, oh, phew, right? We need it. But we also know, what else do we know? The sun can burn us. We need to protect ourselves from the sun. You shouldn't stare directly at the sun. What is Romeo doing? He's staring at Juliet, and his own metaphor tells him to be careful. He can get burned. And we know that if you consume, all you consume is sun, and you don't have any other nutrients or a break, it will kill you, right? We need darkness as well. And it's just amazing that in Juliet is the sun, this small little phrase, this metaphor is enduring metaphor because it uses this light and darkness, that we get almost the whole play in this one phrase. That's a powerful, enduring metaphor. And we could go through a lot of rhetoric and understanding the linguistic power of metaphors. In fact, that's one of the things that I can really talk a lot about. If anyone ever wants to chat about metaphors, I'm up for it. But in this class, we're going to use metaphor to understand conflict. And we're also going to use it to understand our worldview and how we're perceiving things. So is a conflict always a fight? Is it always a fight? Is the word fight is a word that kind of has a feeling of physicality almost to a conflict. Someone got into a fight when I was a kid on the playground. If there was a fight, there was an actual physical fight going on, right? Or oh, this would be a good one for Roadhouse, right? That Roadhouse, the fights that happens in the bar. So how do you describe a conflict, right? How are you doing that? What is the words that you are using? And maybe think about a conflict from your past. How would you describe that interaction? And start circling the words that have any similarity in the description that pull you towards a metaphor. And it's good to identify your worldview. I'm not going to say we're not going to put these in a hierarchy, but we want to expand your language base. So we know the difference between a strategy. Is the conflict a game? And we need a strategy to deal with that situation or that communication event. Or is it, are you in a romantic relationship and you have a lot of things you have to figure out together, and you said you want to be committed to this person for the rest of your life? Is it really a fight, or is it a dance? And can the word dance be a better way to think about how you have this person or persons in your life that you are going to be negotiating and managing differences for your life, for the rest of your life? So I like that dance one. And of course, one of my favorite ones is anything that has to do with nature or earth, like a gardening metaphor, because I already have talked about the benefits of conflict in the first lecture and how it can create growth. And so when you hear that word growth, you can see I might be leaning more towards a worldview of how we can grow together, and the ecosystem of our family, and how an ecosystem, everyone needs different things from it, right? The birds need something different than the animal life, than trees and fungus, and all of these things that make up the ecosystem of a forest can be, if I took that metaphor and started expanding it, all of these could be the different people on my team or in a workplace. And if I understand their role and function and purpose, I understand that the ecosystem of my team can only function when I have everyone working and getting what they need. And that system, approaching it as a system theory, ecosystem metaphors. So to finish up on metaphors, thinking about metaphors as is our language pulling into more mechanical or people-made things, or are metaphors pulling into more nature or nature things, things from the earth, like the stars and the sun and the moon and the ocean? Is conflict like a coral reef? Is conflict like a forest? Or is conflict like a phone? Well, I'll use my phone. Is conflict like a phone with all the apps? Or is it like a bicycle with the gears and things like that? So that's what I want you to think about. Is it more mechanical, people-made, or is it more nature? And start observing your own language as you describe things. Where do you lean towards? Well, now I'm feeling like with AI and technology and computers, I wonder if that would be even a third category. I just had that thought pop up into my head. I'll have to put my some energy into thinking about that. Okay. Going through this dialogue here, this is a pretty long lecture because I have a lot to cover. I'm going to bookmark this so you can move to the pieces you need to. Right now, I want to talk about attribution and attribution theory and fundamental attribution error. And you may have had that vocabulary before in a previous class, but these are one of these biases with the way that we enter into interactions. So when I attribute a behavior to, or I attribute meaning to someone's behavior, I am deciding why they did what they did. Why did they talk to me that way? Why are they ignoring me? Why, right? That's what attribution is. I'm going to figure out the locus of reasoning to understand someone's behavior in an interaction with me. So we have a locus of internal locus, meaning there's something with that person, their personality. And let's just think about Gottman and criticism and contempt, and especially criticism when it's going after someone's personality. It's, if we tie it back into this attribution idea, we are thinking about an internal locus of something's up with that person's personality that puts them in a place where we are going to try and decide why they did something based on their personality. And then we might go after that. Well, if you weren't so insensitive, if you weren't so lazy, whatever it is the criticism is, that's an internal attribution. External attribution is when we are going to move towards a reason that's influencing my behavior from the outside. So if I went back to that perception checking example from earlier, the person I'm living with didn't say goodbye when they left for their day. Was it because they are upset with me because I didn't do the dishes, or were they running late? Both of those are actually external attributions, right? Running late is, there was this time constraint that the person was experiences that influenced their behavior. Is that the reason why they were left without saying goodbye? Or is this dishes in the, are they upset with me? And am I responsible for their behavior? Another external one. I wouldn't say, so before when I said when you're thinking of your two reasons, I was really asking you to create external attributions. If I had said, are you just insensitive and to me because you know it's important to me that you say goodbye, or you obviously don't care for others, right? Like something, I don't know, I'm just thinking this off the top of my head, but if you could think of other internal criticisms, that would be the wrong choice to move into dialogue where we are attacking personality or attacking something about that person that makes up their identity. So with an attribution theory, is it an external locus or an internal locus? When we think about when we're watching the news, especially the way some cable news channels will often have a panel of people, and they'll watch one of the presidential debates, or they'll watch some event that happened in the world, and then they open it up to a panel discussion. If you listen carefully to each person, what they're really doing is they're doing an attribution analysis. unless we get the actual person into the studio to do an interview, we can only say why they answered that question that way, or why did that person show in court do this behavior, or why did they do the behavior that got them into court, right? That's all going to be attribution dialogue. And our court system, especially because our court system is divided into this kind of guilty, innocent, or the classic blindfolded justice with the scales, we usually just have two different sides to an issue. It's a very simplification and kind of a reduction. Often there's multiple parties involved. So if we went back to our definition from Hawker and Wilmot, and we're trying to think about the definition of conflict that Hawker and Wilmot use, it says between at least two parties who perceive incompatible goals, right? So don't fall into this reduction of it's this side and that side. Let's start creating complexity, that there's more than two sides to issues. That's another tool in your toolbox that I need you to have. So our court system, because it's kind of has this guilty, innocent piece to it, to the justice system, often when you hear lawyers presenting a case, or the prosecutor who is bringing the charge forward, they will often argue that they'll probably bring in evidence that there were external reasons for their behavior, and they will bring in evidence of internal attribution locus, that there's something about this person that makes them a criminal, and that's why they've done this behavior, and why we need a discipline action from the court. So you'll often hear a prosecution create an argument this way, where a defense will say, it's not this person. I'm going to show you all these credibility and character and build their ethos of their client. And then they will say, if that happened, if they're even saying that they had any attachment to what happened, they will create an external defense, that it was an unusual circumstance, that has never happened before, and it was only because of this other person, like a self-defense type of self-defense defense being held up to the court will often be that the external locus is, I was defending myself against that other person. And that's why I had to do what I did. So think about that. Those of you who are into true crime and Law and Order and NCIS and all the delicious shows out there, if you start using attribution theory to listen differently to what's happening, that'd be a good example. I'd love to hear about those examples. Maybe you can start hearing the division of the way people are describing behavior. The last piece of attribution theory is fundamental attribution error. And this is when we take a personality trait of a person, and no matter what their behavior is, we blame that person. Internal locus, that's the reason why that person did what they did. They're greedy, they're lazy, and often, whatever the personality trait, this is where we can get really damaging stereotypes or societal kind of norms deciding about someone based on arbitrary factors that have nothing to do with someone, like the color of their skin or their gender or sexuality or ability. We can see that a lot of these become a primary focus, and sometimes people will use that and weaponize it, that no matter what that person does, they always return to that trait of that person as the reason why. Just think about driving, a bad driver, and we want to see who's driving that car so we can blame something that we can only perceive from the person behind the wheel. Age, like, are they old, or they look like a teenager, right? Or the color of their skin or their race. These become a fundamental attribution error and damaging stereotypes when we categorize people and place their behavior into a situation based on very limited information. Okay. Those exciting things, and there's many more biases we'll probably cover throughout the term, like confirmation bias, self-serving bias, positive biases, negative biases. They might crop up through the term, and we should start building our knowledge of these so we can move them from implicit into explicit. We can become aware of them and find better ways to interact with others. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about, I'm looking at the vocab. I'm actually just have Canvas open here on my other screen, and I'm going through the vocabulary that I have posted for you. So if you have that printed out, you can see that I'm kind of moving through that list. I want to talk about culture and cultural differences. I usually make completely separate video for culture, but I'd rather just have one really long video to go over this. I'm going to just take a quick break and I'll be right back to talk about culture. Okay, so we're back and I'm going to talk about culture. When we talk about culture, we're talking about like an umbrella that encompasses a group of people, where that group of people has something that things that they share, that they've learned. Shared and learned are key components of culture. This means that language, traditions, beliefs, all kind of, and other things fall under this idea of culture. When we look at co-culture groups, co-cultures was developed as a way to talk about the groups within, the umbrella, and then there's other groups under that culture. For example, in the United States of America, that is one culture group. And we have from sea to shining sea, from the redwoods to the Gulf Stream waters, there are things that are shared. However, there is an incredible multiplicity to what makes up the United States, and there are a lot of co-culture groups. I would say in general, they've often been called subcultures. However, subcultures isn't really the term that we use in psychology or linguistics or social sciences. We say co-cultures to try and move away from this idea of creating hierarchies with culture groups. So ethnocentrism is when we do that, when we decide to rank cultures. So there's my culture and your culture, right? And we want to avoid doing these kind of hierarchical things, which doesn't mean you don't have to have a preference or where you feel more comfortable with what is known. But it should not be at the expense of another culture group by diminishing their credibility or stereotypes or putting down of others that are different in order to make your preference seem like a better choice, right? We don't want to be better than or worse than in the way that we describe culture groups. So the word co-cultures is to try to imagine that they're existing in this kind of equal plane and there's some equalness for lack of a better word at this moment, for how we're describing those different groups. So if I went back to the United States, we could have co-culture groups of regions, right? We could have the Southwest or the West Coast or the Northwest. We could have the Midwest and we could have the Dakotas or the Northeast. We have the South or Texas. I think Texas is its own culture, right? And then we have places like Hawaii and Alaska or Puerto Rico, where we have these other elements of the what make up our culture, but because of their geographical distance, they have developed even more co-culture kind of expressions. But there's lots of other ways to divide up the culture of the United States. We could do it by music. We have lots of different genres of music. And even within a genre, we could have it broken down even more into more co-culture groups. And all of this is to say is your identity is complex. And if I asked you to tell me who you are, I would expect you to describe many of the co-culture groups that you belong to and all the things that make up your identity, whether that's athletics and sports or hobbies and crafts and arts or music or academics and expertise or professional jobs, travel. Like there's all these things that can make up an identity and how you describe yourself. And of course, of those things, we might hit elements of gender, sexuality, ability, race, religion, and to list just a few of the many different ways that we might describe ourselves. When we're managing our identity, there's a whole different field of studies in psychology and sociology and in communication, as well as I'm sure some other disciplines grab onto identity and how it manifests. Since this is a communication class, and we're in a conflict management class, I'm going to describe some communication cultures. And I want to do that in a way so that we don't create hierarchies, and to look at these communication cultures the way that they've been studied and defined. We want to think of them existing on a spectrum. And you might find you fit exactly in one side or the other side, but you might notice as I describe them that you have some communication competency in your ability to adapt and change your communication codes and style based on context and being appropriate to the audience centered. And we say audience centered to imagine who we are dialoguing with. And even though the word audience, imagine you're on a stage and there's an audience, but when we use it in the field of communication, audience centered is really the other. It's really the other that we're crafting a message to send to. And understanding the other perspective and the other culture so we can be appropriate and create complexity in how we are crafting those messages so that they can be decoded in a way to prevent as much miscommunication or misinterpretation as possible. But of course, everyone is going to do that really differently. And that's why we do perception checking, or we are entering into dialogues to create shared narratives so we can find a common ground to dialogue in. Okay, so let's start with some of these communication cultures. The first one I want to talk about is individual cultures versus collective cultures, though I don't even like that word versus. Sounds like it's this versus that. No, so if we're going to put individualistic or individualism on one side of the spectrum and move across it as a communication culture towards collectivism. And we're going to look at the identities of each of these to kind of understand them better and how they're showing up in dialogue. Sometimes, I just want to say that sometimes just understanding a communication culture difference, you can sometimes manage a conflict with just that one tool. That's how powerful knowing these are. I would say I know about 6 to 8 communication cultures. There's quite a few of them, which I can't go over all of them in this lecture. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. But if you are interested in even more information about intercultural communication, we teach classes on that as well, but you can find a lot of really good readings and information, and I can send you stuff if you're interested. Let me know. Let's talk about these two: individualism, collectivism. Most of the research I'm going to talk about comes from Hofstede. Hofstede is a German theorist who really identified a lot of different communication cultures. And one of the things he does when he developed these theories, he was coming out of World War II, and he was looking at nationalism and the difference from nation to nation, especially after a world war. And what I'm doing in this class is I'm going to take that theory and I'm going to translate it into an interpersonal encounter, so that we can better understand what's happening interpersonally. And you do not have to be from one nation or another nation. You could be in the same family. Your grandma could be more collective and you could be more individual culture style. And I'm talking about communication culture style. And it doesn't mean that you don't love your grandparents. It doesn't mean that you don't want to, it doesn't, again, we're not going to do that hierarchy thing. It just means that there's a communication difference. So in an individual culture, the prime directive is take care of yourself. That's the prime directive of individual culture, to do self-care and to be able to support yourself, to be independent, meaning that you can get up in the morning and you can get yourself ready for your day, and you can get to your job or school on time, and you can come home and your health and all these things are falling into place. You didn't need your parents to do it for you or your grandparents to do it for you. You did it all by yourself. I tied my shoes all by myself. I was able to walk to school and walk home without you helping me. I learned how to drive. All of these. So individual culture has all these benchmarks in childhood where we reward or create this achievement, like, yay, you did something by yourself. Yay, you reached this accomplishment. And it's always, as you reach the end, you're looking ahead to what else could I do on my own. And we're always resetting those goals. There's no end. And sometimes this is one of the difficulties if someone grew up in a really intense culture of individualism and they hit a part of their life, either from illness or economic instability or age, that they lose some of their independence. It often feels like an identity issue because of the culture that they grew up in that puts so much emphasis on that independence and being on your own. One of the communication things we see in individual cultures is this really emphasis on the I. So in these cultures, I is a capitalized letter, as opposed to when we come to some cultures where I grammatically is supposed to be lowercase, or sometimes there's not even a word for it, that the language is more plural based. and we based, but in individual culture, we have a lot of emphasis on that capital I, like, so that means that when I describe my day and I describe what happened to me, I put that emphasis on that I piece. And it also means there's going to be more emphasis on opinions and being able to express yourself and your perspective, and that you have this confidence. There's this demand to have some confidence in your opinion and ability to make a decision based on that what do I need? Now, this is important. The I piece also includes family or partners, or the me and my own. So we see our units, our community units, whatever those look like, whether they're co-worker groups, workplace teams, sport teams, or family, romantic relationships, all of these things that are included in that I. So I take care of myself so I can take care of my group, whatever we want to define that as. Just because you're talking to someone who grew up in a more individual culture, it doesn't mean they don't have family values. They have really, really intense family values. And the way that you take care of your family is you do the best you can, you be the best you can be, you do the best you can do, you look for success, you look for the best job or the best career or your purpose in life. And that's how you give back to your family, by making sure you're doing the very best you can do and not relying on your family for economic support. In individual cultures, if someone moves home, let's say you finish college and you move home and you're living home again, it's always under this kind of, it has this shadow of, we're having you move back home so you can figure out what your next step is, so you can save money to get to the next thing you're going to be doing, or you are moving home to save money, to gather yourself, to you're waiting for the best job to come out, whatever it is. It's always towards, the family will support you when you move towards your goal, whatever that goal is, which is very different. And some individual cultures, because they want to keep that tone of self-support, they'll often ask family members who move back in to pay something towards the household, meaning you need to pay rent or you need to do this to make sure they're always being self-sustaining. Maybe they'll just be a little bit of something, but they want you to save money so you can move out. So it'll just be like this token amount that they'll take to make the relationship more transactional. In a collective culture, so we finished individualism. In collective cultures, the prime directive is that you will take care of your family and you will sacrifice what you have to sacrifice for the harmony and the unity of the group, whatever that group is. So this is that we culture that I know myself, and my self-esteem is based on what I can give back to the family. So there's this sacrificing that happens of self for the harmony of the group. So that means that kids that grow up in collective culture are directed towards a purpose that will serve the group, serve the family. And those decisions are not always made by parents. In collective cultures, there's going to be elders, or there's going to be hierarchies, really power hierarchies of elders or grandparents or extended family that are holding really strict positions that the youth of that family will have to look up to that. So parents are often still under the direction of the elders of the family, however that's defined, or the group. So because the child is being directed towards what's best for the family, they don't usually have a choice of, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want you to be the best, whatever it is you are. Let's figure that out. No, they're usually assigned a role. And birth orders sometimes have hierarchies to them. What elder children will do will be different than other children in the birth order. There's different, and self-esteem comes from how much direction you are given and purpose and strictness that you can show up for the family. And sometimes it's based on gender in some cultures, of what your role is in a family. We might find that also happening in some collective cultures, not all. Sometimes it's age, birth order, sometimes it's gender, and then there might be other things as well. But children are directed towards a purpose. And that is a collective decision made for what the role will be to keep the harmony and prosperity and stability of the group. So how you show up in a collective culture is, what can I give towards that and those ends? What can I give? What can I sacrifice? And it's usually pretty explicit and expected that something is given up. In collective culture, the communication is going to be much more structured, meaning that we're going to have much more process to how a communication event goes. There's going to be maybe special greetings, or the way that we do nonverbals or gift giving will be based on the hierarchies. And I would say collective cultures have really strict hierarchies, where individual cultures are going to, not always. Individual culture can have strict hierarchies too. I want to put that, but if we're going to find something that is more low power, and in it, we will find it more in the individual. I feel like we'll find it less in collective cultures, according to Hofstede. So we'll hear people say we more, we'll see more sacrifices, more accommodating others as the highest ideal of how to deal with things. So sometimes I feel like there's kind of a misrepresentation that, oh, if you care about your family, we love the people that we call family. We love these groups that we're a part of. And so we must be a collective. That is a much more common linguistic definition way of using the word collective. When I use collective culture as a theory, we are talking about a different cultural group, and this is the name we use for them. So this is one of the ways that I'll be looking for how you're using language when you talk about individual versus collective culture, to talk about the theory, not just the personal vernacular way you've used this word in before coming into the theory base piece. Okay. So we talked about individualism and collectivism. I kind of touched in there a little bit on this idea of context and relationship dimensions, which will come up again as we move forward. In this week, we also look a little bit at gender, and the book does actually a pretty good job of kind of defining gender and the kind of cisgenders or gender assigned at birth. And then there's these kind of cultural pieces And then there are elements of neuroscience and physiological elements that make up gender as well. I'm a communication person, so I'm going to be focusing on the cultural piece, since we're in the cultural part of the lecture, on the way that we have social expectations that are either put on us or the patterns we fall into that are associated with this kind of binary cultural division of male and female. Though just like individualism, collectivism, they exist on a spectrum, and you might find yourself somewhere in a more middle ground where you know how to adapt to both. The same thing happens with cultural patterns and expectations that we might have one, if despite our identity or birth assigned gender, the cultural way that we're doing communication might fall into one gender group over another one. We might feel more comfortable here, and that might be contrary to our birth assigned gender or our presentation of gender. So one way to think about this, I will call them masculine and feminine, but that doesn't necessarily line up with being a girl or being non-binary or being a boy or your trans identity. I'm just using these like I used individualism as collectivism to think of it as a spectrum. And the research that I'm going to talk about comes from Deborah Tannen, mostly, who's a linguistic professor with a lot of videos and best-selling books that you could dive into the deep world of Deborah Tannen if this is something that's interesting. And we also teach gender communication. Dr. Showalter in our comm department is a much more equipped expert on this. We need to understand it for this class because sometimes a lot of our conflicts come from these social expectations, or we don't realize we're falling into communication patterns. That was the preamble. That was just the preamble. Okay, let's get into it. So along that lines, if we talk about feminine speech culture is the expectation is that you will sit to talk, you will face each other face to face. There'll be a lot more eye contact. There's a lot more nodding and hums and yeah, oh, right. There's a lot more vocalics happening, responses to demonstrate listening behavior. And then what happens as we're face to face in this dialogue is that we expect that if someone to share something of value, usually a secret or some insider information, and that ability to share something that the other person doesn't know becomes a clue that this person is sending you a signal that they want to be friends with you or they trust you. And the expectation of reciprocity. So reciprocity is what we say in response to what someone said to us. The reciprocity that's offered up by the other person is to share something of equal value. So if I shared you some insider information, some secret, or something about me that no one else knows, to tell you something, we expect the other person to ante up. We expect them to share something of equal value. If they just go, oh, okay. We can get into turn-taking signals later, but for now, we're just talking about this, that we want the relationship dimension to stay with the appearance that we are all the same. And so if I share a vulnerability, I'm expecting the other person to share a vulnerability of equalness. And that if the person I'm talking to does that, then great. We are starting to solidify that this is a unique relationship, this is a friendship, or whatever label we want to put on it. And basically, we're starting to develop in feminine speech culture trust. And so this pressure to always have something to ante up because we don't want to seem like we're better than anyone else. And we definitely don't want to seem like we are lower than anyone else, right? Above or below. So we will do things to save face for the other person as another way in a communication interaction to either build them up if they seem low or something happened to them to upset them. We might use reciprocity to get them back up. Or if we feel like we might be too high, we might say self-deprecating things to pull ourselves back down. So if I say, I got this raise, or this exciting thing just happened to me, I just got a new job, I'm really excited about it. If it pulls me up too high, my news, feminine speech culture kind of demands that I complain about it. Or, wow, I can't believe they chose me. Or, I didn't expect that coming. And this isn't compliment grubbing, or, I'm not fishing for a compliment, but it's because depending on how much someone puts themselves down, it might be a signal to you that they feel like the conversation is uneven, or that the relationship dimension is uneven, and they're trying to do a repair so they don't seem like they're out of sync with the other person. So we often do that. If someone said, oh, I like your sweater, then I might have to do some repairs. Oh, this old thing, right? I might put it down, or I might say where I got my sweater from, so you can have a sweater just like mine, and then we could be the same again. And even if you don't go buy the sweater, or if you can't afford the sweater, or maybe you were just saying it to be nice, whatever it is, if I offer up where I got it, somehow that also becomes repair, which is why often you'll hear in feminine speech culture a lot of conversations around people saying, oh, I got this here, or this is how much it cost, or this old thing. Oh, really? You like this? I wasn't sure. I almost didn't wear this today because I'm not sure I really thought this would look good, but it's okay. Well, blah, 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 whatever it is. The reason why we put so much energy into trying to keep things equal is that if someone is too high up or someone is too far low, they stop getting included in the inside information, or they stop getting invited to the birthday party, as Deborah Tannen loves to say, right? All of these things start happening where they get excluded. And in feminine speech culture, there are hierarchies. When we get to masculine speech culture, it is about the hierarchy, but here the hierarchy is very high context. It's very implicit and invisible, and it's not often pointed out, but usually it's who knew what, where, when. So siblings, if you come from a family with a lot of siblings, one of the ways often that if there's a dominant feminine speech culture or matriarch running the family, one of the things you'll notice is the injury in the siblings is someone found out something before them. And that's a signal that you're leaning more feminine speech, that that would be a concern. Why didn't anyone tell me that we were planning a holiday event or planning a camping trip? I'm just finding out about this, right? Those are all injuries or conflicts because of the idea of being included or excluded, which is, this isn't like, oh, this is just women who think this way, right? This is the human experience to be socially included. I'm just talking about the feminine speech culture that uses it as an invisible way to create hierarchies. Okay, let's talk about masculine speech culture. So in masculine speech culture, I'll come over here, that conversations are often faced out non-verbally. There's less eye contact and less vocalizations to demonstrate listening. That we will see more self-disclosure happening when there's activities fueling the conversation. So we're playing a video game, or we're exercising, going for a run, or working out, whatever it is, it's activity based is what creates the dialogue. My favorite example for this, and I'll share it with you too, is so when my book club gets together, we sit around the dining room, we make a big meal, everyone brings food, we sit around the table, there's a lot of good wine, and we sit and talk around this dining room table as we enjoy a great meal. And that's what my book club does. And boy, can we dish. We're really good at dishing. Though my husband, when he goes out with his buddies hunting, he's tromping around the woods with his buddy, and he comes back with the best details and goodies about the family and work and things like that. And I'm always, as soon as he comes home, I'm like, tell me everything, right? I want to know. There's my feminine speech thing. I want to know, want to be included. But I think it's interesting that he's getting the same type of self-disclosure and inside information and secrets and things like that, but it's activity-based. It's through the activity that and the motion of it that the self-disclosure is coming. And that's why often when we see intercultural exchange where someone tends towards feminine speech and someone tends towards masculine speech, that they struggle if the conversation is about sitting down. Why aren't you looking at me when you're talking to me? Like this demand for eye contact and a specific type of attention. When we know that listening is actually enhanced through less eye contact, or at least the retention of information. And actually, if you do notice feminine speech sitting there, eyes are often cast downwards so that they can listen better. But there's more access to eye contact throughout the conversation. So masculine speech is about creating hierarchies. So when someone antes up information, there is the reciprocity is usually to say, oh, I knew that, and then add something to the conversation. And I know this. Well, I knew that, and I know this. Well, I knew that, and I know this. Oh, yeah, I've been there, done that before. What about? And so there's this constant climbing of a ladder, and a dialogue sometimes has this. It has a competitive element to it, but it also has this kind of synergy and problem-solving energy of trying to get to the point. And conversations in masculine speech are always in this kind of reductive place where they're moving towards the point. And we call that instrumental talk. And that is part of the goal in masculine speech, and why sometimes there are stereotypes like, oh, I tried to share what happened in my day, and all my partner did was tell me how to solve the problem. And I didn't want to know how to solve the problem. I was just looking for acknowledgement and reciprocity, and so this is something that sometimes we'll struggle with in an intercultural encounter. So it's a good thing to think about if we're talking about masculine and feminine speech working on a spectrum, and communication competency is how we adapt and are appropriate to the audience, and how we are considerate and changing for that audience. So, for example, if I know my husband is more masculine speech, sometimes that when I really need self-disclosure from him and I really need to know what he's thinking, I will often wait till we're in the car on a long road trip to to Portland or to the city or to the forest to bring it up. Not because I want to start a conflict in the car, just the opposite. I'm trying to understand his perspective and give him room to self-disclose. So where I do notice my husband does the same for me. He often, when I'm very upset, he will say, let's sit down. And he'll pull me to sit down, and he because I'm his wife and I talk about this stuff, he knows that I lean more feminine speech, and he also knows what I need for self-disclosure as well. And it'll often show up in a listening way and adapt to my style. And that's really what we're looking for in a synergy of dealing with situations, that when we have a conflict, how interested is the other party in each other's perspective and communication styles, and how we are adapting to those. Okay. So let me finish with masculine speech. It's not the conclusion yet. The other way that hierarchies are established here in masculine speech is through teasing and razzing. And when we think about teasing, I just got to make a note so I remember to tell you about this. We'll go over it again when we get to emotions, but mention it now. So teasing and razzing, you might have a team made up of masculine speech people, communication people, and they want that hierarchy. That hierarchy is not necessarily negative. If you're more feminine speech, it's like, what's happening over there? It's chaos. But sometimes that's the way that we feel order and we feel respect, is through the hierarchy. And so when we see a respectful group, whatever it is that, or team that is a more masculine speech team style, what happens is whoever is the alphas, or the more people who are higher up on those rungs of the ladder, will actually allow teasing upward, not just downward. And the teasing upwards and the teasing downward is to squash the ladder as much as possible. Like, they want the hierarchy, but we're going to squash it. And when you see teasing going in both directions, that could be a signal that things are a bit more, there's more camaraderie, there's more respect. And one way to gauge this, if you have this experience, is with the way parents raise kids in masculine speech culture. Parenting style, that does the parent who's teasing their kids and doing practical jokes or whatever it is, or razzing them, giving them a hard time, it's usually for the motivation. I was like, we got to tough you up. The world out there is not going to be loving and kind, and I'm going to get your skin a little thicker so you can deal with the craziness of the world out there that you have to deal with. So that's usually the motivation for toughening up kids for the world. But are the kids allowed to tease the parent? Are they allowed to play a joke on the parent, or be silly and playful and fun and get a good dig in that way? Or is it only allowed, or is teasing only allowed one way? And that's a good way, if you can notice that, that would be kind of what I'm trying to talk about with teasing and razzing. I like the word razzing. A couple of caveats about this. So a couple things about teasing. When it's only going down and it starts getting towards criticism, where we're attacking personality, or we're attacking someone's economic status, or we are using a gender attack against someone, like be a man, or you don't want to throw like a girl, like whatever these kind of gender attacks that have been built into our language for that binary gender performance style, that those are really kind of things that when teasing becomes really toxic and it turns into bullying, or the injury can really damage someone's self-esteem in ways that, so we want to kind of become aware of the way teasing is used, either as a fun way to, as something kind of fun and playful, to when we're on the border of really damaging someone's self-esteem and identity. So think about that. And teasing is not allowed in feminine speech. If you're way over here in feminine speech, that, it's often why some people who are more feminine speech are really offended by teasing. So you really want to be aware of a person's worldview and cultural perspective so you can manage these situations and adapt to them. That's what communication competency is. I know I'm going to keep saying it over and over again. I said it. I think that's the third time I've said it. Won't be the last. When we think about, and this is, we'll talk about this in more when we get to the emotion week, but when we think about teasing, if there are comments that are directed towards someone, either in criticism or using this idea of a joke to do an attack, right? When we talk about aggression, indirect aggression, passive aggressive, if someone's trying to use humor as a channel and it's really a criticism or contempt or attack, it's usually going to be something that is very personal to that person, like that person knows how to just hit the right note to injure the other person and lower their status. So in relationships, when we have a peer relationship or a relationship of respect, if someone is worried that they are out of sync, where someone has more status than them, one kind of status attack is to lower them, is try to lower their self-esteem, even if we can't, they might make more money than me, or they might have more friends than I do, and I'm thinking that makes us not the same in status. Someone often might attack that piece of them or something else, like their appearance, to try and make them question themselves, make them question their appearance or their credibility, and if they move into defensiveness and it starts to lower their self-esteem, especially over long periods of time, we can see erosion of that. It might be a tactic being used by this person in order for their own inadequacies to make that person feel that way as well. So be aware of those kinds of injuries. When we get to the reason why I say we'll talk about it more when we get to emotions is we'll talk a lot about anger and other emotions and how we use language to articulate those things and how do injuries occur, status injury. Oh, so in the last thing about feminine and masculine speech, and I'm doing this big sigh because I'm getting to the end. Yay. So feminine speech all day long is always really worried that they're going to say the wrong thing, that they are going to appear too better than anyone or too lower than anyone. Feminine speech, it has to be careful at what they ante up. We have to do reciprocity all the time. I might have to share a problem. I don't want to share my problems. My problems are my problems. Why do I have to tell them to you? Okay, maybe I'll ante up someone else's problem just to stay in the game, in the conversation game here, so I look like I'm participating, right? So we might ante up another person's problem. So these things that start showing up, that all day long, there's all this communication pressure that becomes this restriction. There's this feminine speech has this heavy restriction on talking, to be very, very careful. So feminine speech gets home at the end of the day and they're like, oh my God, you won't believe what happened to me today. And what you get is a series of timeline monologues of every interaction. And this is what I said, but this is what I really wanted to say. If I didn't have this clamp on me, I would have really said this. And this is what I was really thinking. This is what I thought. And right. And then they turn to their masculine speech partner and say, how was your day? And that person goes, oh yeah, it was about the same as always. I just told you the minutia of every single conversation I have. And remember what feminine speech is expecting. They're expecting reciprocity that is amping up their experiences that match their experiences. I want to hear about the problems of your day, so I know I'm not the only one with problems, right? Masculine speech, though, so let's go through masculine speech day all day long. It's like I have to be ready to talk. So there's this energy towards I got to have the information, I got to have the facts. Oh, if this person shared this, what can I put into the pot? I got to manage my place on that ladder. Did someone tease me? Am I teasing? Maybe I should tease someone back. Did someone give me an order I don't want, or did I take orders? All this pressure to communicate and get home. And how was my day? Whew. Finally, I can be myself and I don't have to talk to prove who I am. It was the same as always. Same old stuff I have to deal with every single day. Right? So masculine speech, the way masculine speech uses talk is to position themselves on the ladder. But when they're safe in their home and they feel like they're in a stable relationship, you'll often hear less talk. This is often also why when feminine speech and masculine speech are on a date, masculine speech may have been like really like a lot of eye contact. I've got you in my gaze. I want you to be my partner. And so I'm going to keep my eye on you and I am going to tell you who I am. And I'm going to show up with all these statements about me and my credibility and give you examples of, right? And once they're safe in the relationship, that drops off because they feel the safety of the relationship. So this is often the way we see conflicts showing up in the home when we have two people who are in different communication culture foundations, which doesn't mean that they don't know how to. Sometimes people know how to adapt and move around on the spectrum. So, all right. So this week 2, this was a long lecture. Now you see why sometimes I break it up into 2 or 3 videos, but this was my attempt at making one video for this whole week. And I'll bookmark them. So hopefully if you need to ever reference it, you don't have to figure out where is the vocabulary in this lecture. Thank you, everyone. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.